Choose one. Choose one. Choose one. Choose. Choose one. 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 Choose one.
When
Welcome back.
people would not be judged by the colour of their skin, but by the content of their character. How is today's identity politics consistent with that vision?
Jordan Peterson.
Well, I don't think it's consistent with that vision at all. I mean, the problem I have with identity politics as a mode of philosophical apprehension is that it's predicated on the idea that the appropriate way to classify people is by their group identity, in whatever fragmentary formulation that might take, in the multiplicity of ways that people can be divided into groups. And the classical postmodern, and I would also say Marxist way of viewing the world, even though those two things shouldn't be allowed together, they tend to be, is that group identity takes priority over individual identity, and I think that's precisely the opposite of what Martin Luther King was hoping for and working for. And I think it's unbelievably dangerous, partly because when you assume that people should primarily be identified by their group, then you can also attribute group guilt to them by their group. And then things go downhill very, very rapidly. And we've had no shortage of evidence of that sort of thing happening, say, throughout the 20th century.
Are there particular groups that you are more concerned about than others? For example, the Liberal Party, as Terry Butler said earlier, is a group. Are there groups that you think are more dangerous?
There isn't a problem with groups. The problem is with assuming that the fundamental way that you should categorize people is with their group identity. Obviously, we all belong to groups. The issue is whether or not the individual identity is primary and the group identity is secondary, or the group identity is primary and the individual identity is secondary. If you're a proponent, for example, of equality of outcome, of quotas, then you de facto accept the proposition that it's the group identity that is primary, and there's all sorts of dangers that are associated with that that far outweigh whatever good you're likely to do.
Okay,
Well, maybe you just...
Go ahead.
Or maybe you just think that representative democracy should be representative. Maybe you just think that women should be equally represented in the decision-making fora of our nation. Maybe that's really just about having proper equality in a body that's meant to be representative.
Well, I do believe that women should have... I don't understand your question, I guess.
I guess you
Yeah.
don't. That's pretty
I don't-
obvious, unfortunately.
Well, how about if you phrase it more clearly instead of just insulting me? Look at it this way. Let's talk about quotas for a minute. So there's a very wide array of jobs that are fundamentally done by men. So, for example,
Member of Parliament, the Liberal Party.
99.9% of
Sorry, Alex, I'm going to
bricklayers.
stop sledging you now, I promise.
I'm happy to give my minute to Jordan.
99.9% of bricklayers are men. Should we have quotas for women?
Is bricklaying representative democracy?
That has nothing to do with the question. The question is if there's evidence of structural inequality and oppression because women aren't precisely represented at 50% in all professions at all levels, then why don't we have a conversation about having women represented in all professions at all levels?
Well,
why do we talk about the C-suite, for example? Why do we talk about politics and positions of power? Why don't we talk about it across the board?
Okay,
we're
so
talking about
let's
politics,
just pause
that's
and...
why-
Yeah, but that's because
We're
it's
talking about-
power.
You pose a question to Terry Butler. Go ahead and answer it, then we'll hear from the other panellists.
His question to me.
Well, yeah, if you'd,
About
like,
bricklayers.
if you'd like to answer the question about bricklayers.
There's nothing wrong with bricklayers.
Why there are no
Of course
quotas in
there's not.
bricklaying.
It's just...
I think you were trying to draw a distinction between bricklaying and running the government.
And I was suggesting that a representative democracy should be representative. That was the point I made. And I don't think...
Representative of it by quota?
Well, sure, if that's what it takes. I mean,
Yeah,
it's
well,
worked
that's
for us.
exactly what you would
No,
say.
but you know, I can
That just means a dreadful strategic inadequacy on
look,
your
I'm-
part.
Really,
I'm
we're
like-
terribly
The Liberal
dreadful
Party
as to
steered away
being
from
inadequate.
quotas,
I'm loath to interrupt
and
this,
the women
but,
are steering away from the
I'm
Liberal
actually
Party.
quite enjoying this. I'm loath to interrupt.
I'm really
Well, no,
enjoying
they have
it. Tell us
quotas for
more
the
about
National
them.
Party and
this,
for the
this,
state.
this assault on the Liberal Party from people that don't care about us at all and are our political
Oh, I
enemies
care.
is
Oh, we
often
deeply care.
quite mystifying. But the absurdity of the position that Terry puts in this quota-based argument over time, it is a reductive, absurd argument. It's like saying no women vote for men and no men vote for women. It is not true. People vote and seek for the best person to represent them in Parliament. So quotas, you say quotas are a fabulous thing in the Labor Party because they've helped you meet a target. But there may be a day in our Australian Parliament, and it'll probably come sometime, where we have 75% women in the Parliament. That won't be a problem to me.
Do you
if
mean
that
in
occurs.
300 years'
It won't-
time when you guys
No,
finally
it won't
get
be
some
a
women
problem.
there?
It won't be a problem if that occurs that way, and it should occur that way if that's what people want.
Okay,
But
let's...
this constant
I'm
identity
going to let you
politics
finish your
fails.
point, and let's hear from Van Batten.
Well, two things. One, there is an organisation that's campaigning for equal representation of bricklayers and women in trades, and I'd like to do a big shout out to WIMDOI, which is the organisation that promotes women's participation in trades. They do incredible work, and I'd like to acknowledge unions like the ETU, who do a lot of work to encourage women to become electricians. And this,
Come on, Van, we're not doing ads here.
But-
Let's go to the point.
But this is the thing, you know, it's this pretense, it's this insistence that things don't exist that do. And for example, the empirical evidence which exists, there was a longitudinal study that was reported in the Harvard Business Review, hardly a repository of doctrinaire Marxism, that talked about, and there was a longitudinal study that looked at 40 years of affirmative action in the workplace. And the companies, organisations, governments, committees that did have a quota policy. And do you know what they found after 40 years? Those organisations were in better shape. Companies with more diverse decision-making structures actually made more money. Organisations that had more diverse decision-making structures actually had higher productivity. Outcomes were better when more people were involved.
Okay.
And that is a
is-
matter of science.
That is your minute.
matter of more science.
Okay, we're going to go to a related question. It's from Peter Sheehy. Peter.
Thanks, Tony. This is for Jordan initially. There has been an increasing trend here in Australia that anyone who has a counter view to the socialists, PC lobby, Greens, Communist Brigade
Your friend.
are
It's on national television right now.
shouted down,
Literally,
and called racists or homophobics, so that any form of rational debate is difficult, if not impossible, to now have. How can we counter this?
Peter, I assume you're making an exception. You're making an exception for Q&A, I dare say, because we are having that debate as we speak.
And I haven't been shouted down.
There you go.
So, you're making progress, Tony.
Jordan Peterson.
Or you're wrong.
possibly you're just wrong.
Jordan
That is
Peterson.
possible.
Well, look, I've been called every pejorative in the book, I think, except pedophile. But, well, I've tried to keep track of them. One day last year, I was called a Jewish shill and a Nazi the same day, which was, I guess, a high point. Your claim that if we engage in certain types of discussions, this kind of reaction emerges is absolutely the case. I mean, for at least 6 months after I made what you might describe as my initial political stance, I was swarmed by people who were using every possible pejorative to take me out so that none of my arguments needed to be taken seriously. How do we deal with that? Well, hopefully we stop calling each other cheap names. That would be a nice start, rather than addressing the issues. But I would also say a certain amount of persistence is called for. If you're mobbed on social media, a brief bit of advice by people who are doing exactly the sort of thing that you're describing, I would say 2 things. The first is be careful about what you've said and what you've said in the past, and maybe it's a bit too late for that. The second thing I would say is, if you haven't done anything wrong, do not apologize.
That is your minute.
And then wait 2 weeks, and it'll go away.
Terry Butler. Come to you. Terry first. Go ahead. Do you accept any truth to the basis of the question from your point of view?
I mean, my job is I go and hear different points of views all the time. All I hear is debate. All I hear is people with different opinions. I just don't accept that you can't have an opinion in this country without being shouted down. I mean, it just seems so silly.
We've had a number of right-wing people come to this country, and then they've had their venues targeted. They've had to leave the country because of the radicals of the left that won't let them put a point of view that's different to the socialist left. And it's getting worse. I've got a lot of grey hair.
Sure.
This didn't happen in this country 15 years ago.
I have to say I've got a lot too, but it's pretty well dyed in my case. We have right here on national television tonight Professor Jordan Peterson, whom you might know is a figure of some controversy, and I say that with respect. I don't mean it in a pejorative way, but is a figure of some...
Sounds a little pejorative to me.
Is a figure of some...
Especially given the company that you put me in.
Well, I don't know which company he's talking about, but we're here having a very civilised conversation, I think, and there's people having very different views. I don't think it's true that people can't say things in this country, and I think that those who say that are going to have, I think, a very disproportionate,
so I can make an exception.
a very disproportionate impact on whether people are willing to speak out. If you keep telling people they can't say things, they can't ventilate ideas, which is what you're doing, then they're going to be scared to do it. So you need to take responsibility, personal responsibility, I would venture, for what you're
Which
saying.
country do you live in again?
Okay, all right. Hang on a
I think
sec.
you already know.
Let's hear from Catherine.
Yeah, look, pulling a couple of things together here, I think there's merit in Jordan's assertion that we are living better than our grandparents, and to keep walking both sides of the street. That in no small part is due to the Australian trade union movement. Just to get this clear, I haven't cast a Labor vote since 1998. I voted for the centre-right tradition in Australia for this entire century. But I have enormous respect for the trade union movement. I'm not anti-union, and the coalition, for reasons of ideology and so on, opposed every national wage case when there were national wage cases, and Terry, I'm grey too, mate. I can remember when they had them. The trade union movement has placed a great deal of ballast underneath living standards in Australia and more strength to it. And the trade union movement, Alex, that was a poor rendition of Labor history. The Communist Party was broken by right-wing trade unions.
I think we might be just slightly off the...
But these are
Can you just address the point of that question is that people with certain views are being shouted down. Do you agree with that or not?
Well, OK, I'll give you...
Emotional damage!
Talk about vituperation. I'm called... by the way, I found out I was Jewish yesterday too.
Me too.
You can fact-check that on the ABC Facebook page. It does require some resilience. And by the way, I actually do think we are approaching... And Robert French, an extremely eminent and progressive former Chief Justice of the High Court, thinks we've got a problem with freedom of speech on campuses. I've taught in the university sector. Fear of offence, trigger warnings and so on don't have a place in the academy. They don't. There are very few views that are so repugnant that they can't be ventilated. I really believe that, and I've been on the receiving end of a lot of very fast bowling, some of which have been very hurtful. But I haven't sued anyone for defamation as yet. I've been threatened by such free speech warriors as the online editor of Quadrant magazine for making fun of him no more, and others. And I've sucked up a fair bit of it. So I have skin in this game. I've put my money where my mouth is. But I do think there is merit to your point. I think, especially in the university sector, there's got to be some more resilience. We've got to hear viewpoints we don't agree with.
OK, I'm going to actually... Thank you very much. Clap quickly because we're running out of time. The next question comes from... It actually takes us back in a sense to where Jordan Peterson's prominence began. Comes from Tara Parkhill.
Yes, this is directed towards Jordan Peterson. You stated before to the BBC that by adhering to people's preferred pronouns, that it's the starting point to an authoritarian regime or society. Is it possible, however, that it's more about giving people more rights and liberty, or even something as fundamental as respect?
Jordan.
Well, I never said that. What I said was that I wasn't going to allow the contents of my speech to be dictated by a virtue-signaling government, when never in the history of an English common law society had a government dared to regulate the actual voluntary contents of someone's speech except in a commercial situation.
Just explain, Jordan, to those in the audience who don't know precisely what you're talking about, what it was the government of Canada
the provincial and Canadian, they did legislate it. The provincial and Canadian government, or the provincial and federal governments in Canada, mandated the use of personal pronouns and made it a criminal offence not to use them, at least under some circumstances. And there's been a variety of negative consequences of that, including the persecution of a teaching assistant at a university known as Wilfrid Laurier. And it isn't a matter of respect at all. And look, in the 1940s, the American Supreme Court, Americans have a very tight, what would you call, control or tight respect for free speech, decided that it was not constitutional for the government to place mandatory requirements on what people were required to utter in terms of their voluntary speech. There are certain things you can't say.
Can you hear me now?
But the government's not to mandate what you have to say.
Can you hear me now? Sorry.
Respect and
I forgot I was
altruism and all
muted
of
on
that
my
is completely
headset.
irrelevant as far as I'm concerned.
So just to clarify that point, if the government had said, made it a kind of voluntary
Now you can hear me.
thing, but with advice that that's what should happen, would you have gone along with that?
Well, they've been doing that for years, and I'm perfectly... look, I've dealt with all sorts of people in my life. I treat people very politely. As a matter of course, if I'm dealing with someone reasonable, I address them in the manner that seems to be most appropriate to the social situation and most conducive to their,
doing good. How you doing?
well-being mutually agreed upon. But as soon as the government decides that they have the right to decide what I have to say because of some false altruism on their part or some underlying and unexpressed ideology, then the answer to that is no damn way.
Captain McGregor.
Look, obviously, Jordan's point on free speech has weight and should be attributed weight. And my experience of this has been, and I've lived it.
Somebody got to invite me for that one.
It more often
The Sarge.
called it as we speak tonight. I know because I get that most days in one form or another. I think my Adam's apple is trending on Twitter, if my last glimpse was any indication. I would pick up a couple of points on jurisprudence, though, Jordan, if I may, and one is that the government in common law jurisdictions has prescribed speech in all kinds of ways. The reason William Shakespeare wrote Hamlet and Richard III and Macbeth was that it was an offence punishable by death to compass the death of the sovereign. So any of his plays in which the regal figure was killed during the reign of Elizabeth I you could not actually write an English-based play. Compassing the death of the sovereign is a massive infringement on free speech, satire. Try telling a flight attendant when you leave town tomorrow that you can't remember whether you packed your bomb in your luggage or not, and see how that goes in terms of whether you get your collar felt for a satirical jest, potentially. So there are all kinds of regulations of speech. I don't believe, as a minority, the trans community can legislate our way to acceptance. We can't. We have too often, in my experience, inverted the power relations. We're a telephone booth minority, despite the arguments that there's an epidemic of transgenderism. We're more visible, and that is destabilising to people's notions of binary gender. I get that. I just think your first point in your opening remarks about the individual dignity of the human being a Western concept, and I agree with you.
Okay, nice.
The day will come when we don't
went out and did a little something.
C16 to mandate this, that where the experience I've largely had, by the way, and especially humbling in the world of global cricket, where some of the most alpha guys around have treated me with just enormous respect, and it's a given.
Yes.
I've been very blessed. I'm more privileged than most trans people.
Some of them actually suggested you play for the women's cricket leagues, but you rejected doing that.
No, I didn't. I wasn't good enough. Greg Chappell was in it.
Landing gear.
Landing gear is raised.
Landing gear.
Retracting landing modules.
Oh, wow. What made you sick?
Disengaging automated flight control routine. Safe travels, Commander.
Some bad Chinese, huh? It's always the Chinese, huh? Engage FSD.
Frameshift drive engaging.
Whoa. Engage Super Cruise.
Engaging Super Cruise.
What they say about it?
Accessing database. Eden.
Superposition. Quantum objects can exist in two or more states at once. An electron in superposition,
you didn't call, complain,
can simultaneously move
file a report
and anti-clockwise
like you're supposed to? If you got food poisoning, go to the doctor? Nah? Okay.
That's great. Really great.
If you didn't make a doctor's appointment or go into the actually, doctor's appointment is underrating it. If you didn't go into the hospital, you ain't got no food poisoning. You get food poisoning, trust me, you going to the fucking hospital. There is no way around that. That is just a fact of life. You just dealing with it. Oh, you just didn't feel good from some you found a shell of an egg, and that's the culprit. You never mind. So it wasn't a Chinese food. You was just looking for something to put it on because you don't know what the fuck it is. Could be poor health, any goddamn thing. You don't even know what the fuck it is. You just guessing. All right. You're a doctor? You know anything about medical of any type? First aid? All right, I should. It don't have to be something you ate. You could have touched something. Touch your face with it. Like a bad smell made you feel off. So much. Like what do you engage FSD.
Frameshift drive engaged.
So because you didn't feel good, you had to assume it was something you ate. Alright, that's fine. You can be done with me. Have a good evening. Peace.
Leaving system. So long.
Ain't hurting me not one bit.
Hyperspace velocity reached. Whee!
Hypervelocity
Exit
reached.
destination confirmed. Arrival in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Scanning the entire system. Cartography is updating now.
Where am I? Zero. Oh, I wasn't being silly. I was being honest. You be on some extra shit. Aconine. Okay, I'm going up here. Better something shit. Where the fuck are you at? Aconine. I'm really heading back up that way. Okay, well that is not where I was trying to go. Shit. I better go kill these dudes first. Are you talking to me? Are you talking to me now? Engage FSD.
Interstellar travel mode engaging now.
through the winter. I didn't get picked up. I've had a lot of support. Jason Gillespie and Bronnie Cly from the Adelaide franchise were willing to have a look at me. Darren Lehman offered me a net with the Australian team. I had a rails run. I wasn't good enough. I'm straddling the gap between the first-class system and grade cricket. And I don't disagree with Jordan on the fact that, that born males have an enormous advantage in sport. I'm averaging, before I cooked my shoulder, I was averaging 115 in grade cricket. You can fact check that on the My Cricket app.
I think you made that point. Let's move on.
Going all right.
We're going to move on to religion. The next question comes via Skype. It's from Gabrielle Casey in Greystones in New South Wales. Go ahead, Gabrielle.
Thanks. My question's to Catherine and also to the whole panel. But so one thing I've noticed is that the topic of human dignity seems to be one that the whole panel agrees on. That people, whether in groups or in, as individuals, we have dignity. My question is, do you believe in God? Because as a Catholic especially, I don't see any other way where we can have a universal dignity beyond there being a God.
What beard? I ain't got no beard.
Catherine, and Jordan, I think, but the rest of the panel too.
Look, this is a huge topic, and I'm not going to duck it. I believe in God.
Like, I just grew this shit today. When I was talking to you last time, I was sitting there scratching the itchy motherfucker.
Primary academic interest. I drank way too much. I only died from the disease of alcoholism. I was raised a Catholic. I still have enormous fondness for Catholicism, especially its rituals. In the lead up to what happened in my life and the gender transition and feelings coming to the fore that I had wrestled with and dealt with in maladroit ways right up to the age of 56, I went through a number of stages. I was a militant atheist. I went into quite exotic left-wing politics as a young person. That might seem rather strange to people now, but I was on the committee for the acquittal of Alistair Dunn and Anderson, the East Timor Solidarity Group. Name it, I was in it. And didn't ever get around to the revolution. But I do believe, and I base that on experience, in the sense that there was I can only describe as phenomenal in response to a very
turn the fucking heat on.
In delirium tremens. I've not had a drink since the
okay.
I then became more devout and went back into more organised religion. Clearly what has happened, what I've done, no, it won't be his passive voice, what I have done has placed me outside organised religion. I've been welcome in some Anglican communities and I go there because I like the ritual.
Nearly out of time, Catherine,
right.
I'm sorry to say.
But without beating my breast in the public square, I pray daily. I pray in the morning on awakening. I pray at intervals throughout the day. And I try to meditate, I try to centre myself, and I try to pray. I don't pray for specific outcomes. I'll close this because it is a worthwhile story. A former Test cricket captain of Australia, a beautiful man with whom I shared a platform ahead of a match, a guy called Brian Booth, who's in his 80s, very devout Pentecostal from the Shire, down where the Prime Minister operates. Brian reached out to me through cricket. I'd offered to step aside from a panel, given his age, and that I didn't wish to. I didn't want it to be confronted. You know, the guy's a Test cricket captain. He's entitled to be the speaker without the distraction. He embraced me and said, "We're all broken. We're all sinners." He and I read Psalms to one another in a phone call on Saturday, a very moving moment, bringing together two defining elements of my life. And one is a belief, and it's not an unreasonable belief. I act as if I don't proselytise about it. I don't run around with a sandwich board telling people to repent.
Gathering information, cartography updated.
It's the foundation of my
Accessing library.
Thanks, Catherine. I only learned today that you're a Christian.
I am. I'm
Christian.
very devout.
Well, I'm glad you enjoy my beard.
Yes, both at the same time.
It's a nice beard.
In the great Western
Itchy as a
tradition, being able
motherfucker,
to
though.
hold two positions at once. You know, the foundational approach of Marxism is the concept
beard
of
nonetheless.
dialectic, where we have thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. So I found that my Catholicism and my Marxism is an excellent tension to come to a moral decision and to think about how to live a good life.
And do you believe in God? That was
I
the literal question.
absolutely believe in God, and my faith sustains me through darkness. My faith gives me meaning, and I draw succour from my faith community and meaning. And these positions are not irreconcilable. I get very worried about this, clash of civilizations thesis that, the idea, for example, that feminists must be this and communists must be this and socialists are evil, and this polarity. We are all simultaneous identities. We all contain multitudes. And my belief in God is absolutely integral to my commitment to socialism and my sense of serving good works and the social justice mission of the Catholic Church.
Well, thanks for listening on simultaneous identity politics. Alec, what do you think?
Well, look, I believe in God. I'm a Protestant by tradition, and I've married a Catholic, so all my children are being baptised Catholic. So my protesting has failed in one. Look, I'm not sure you can be a Christian and a Marxist together. Look, and I say that because
I cease to exist.
They're mutually exclusive. They're mutually exclusive. But the point I want to make a broader point about the West. The West, one of the great successes of the West was that we separated the church and the state, and religion is a private matter, and it's a matter for individuals, and it's a matter for how individuals want to choose.
So what you been up
their
to?
religious
You
faith,
still didn't
and
tell me,
separate
Tim.
from the operation of the state. That is a new concept in human history. It's been very successful, and I think when you look at societies that still have religion,
What you been
and
up
the
to
state
last few
defined,
days?
They're not successful. They are wholly separate things.
Told me, yeah, you did this,
Well,
yeah,
I'm
you did that,
agnostic,
but
it's a matter. My husband makes fun of me about it.
shit, nothing exciting.
He's like, well, why are you having a bet
Entertaining?
both ways? You're not going to get into heaven that
ate
way.
a bowl of ice cream.
But I've been agnostic. I've always identified that way. But to the questioner's point about
Talk to me. Tell me something good.
You absolutely can. There's a great secular humanist tradition that says that people are
Tell me that you like me, yeah.
And that you can do the right thing because it is your moral duty to do the right thing without that moral duty being conferred upon humanity by a God. And I want to do the right thing because I believe that every person is as valuable as
Thank you.
and that they deserve that I treat them well, and that it is my duty as a human to other humans to seek to meet that moral standard.
Jordan, I've actually heard you ask this question a number of times, and I don't think I've ever heard you give a definitive answer.
Yeah, I don't like the question.
How come?
Well, I don't know exactly. I think part of it
is too
because,
personal?
Yeah, I think it's private. There's a statement in the Old Testament about the
Jesus,
what do you call it? Immorality of praying in public, let's say, to make known your good works, your faith, because of the benefits that might confer upon you that have absolutely nothing to do with the moral actions that might allow you to truly deserve them.
The bulk of the main sequence stars in the galaxy.
I think
their mass is low, as is their surface temperature.
These systems are vast. There is much to discover.
Random Hawking quote. Random Stephen Hawking quote. Quote Stephen Hawking. Quote Stephen Hawking. Voice activation sometimes doesn't work well. How about quote Stephen Hawking? Quote Stephen Hawking. Random fact. Ooh, shit. Well, I guess it ain't gonna tell me none of that, and I'm return with my Jordan.
I think of religious matters a lot. I would consider myself a deeply religious person. I would say, and I have said this before, that I act as if God exists and that I'm terrified that he might. But I don't consider myself an authority on metaphysical issues, and I don't believe that my belief in God is... It's not something that seems to me to be fit for... There's something wrong. There's something wrong that I can't put my finger on triumphantly declaiming my belief in one manner or another. And so it's something that I prefer to leave in the manner that I've left it. So I act as if God exists. I try to do my best as a person who's obsessed with religious matters. But I'm not willing to place myself conveniently.
System map. System map. System map.
System map.
All right, let's see what we got here. Exit map. Exit system. Exit system map.
Closing now.
That's why I need the nav beacon, huh?
Awaiting orders.
Copy. Deploying the fighter now.
Bro, you don't know how bad you just fucked up.
Fighter is clear of the mothership.
Deploy hard points. Up hard points. You're fucked, dude. You fucking piece of shit. Suck gas, evildoer. Come here, motherfucker. Who you think you shoot at, you piece of shit? No, motherfucker. Fighter attack.
Things were a little hairy for a second there. No more hostiles detected.
Recall fighter.
On my way, Commander. Fighter.
Piece of shit.
Is it over already? Recalling fighters. Return to the ship immediately. Opening hatch.
Oh, I like it when the idiots come and find me instead. That is so wonderful.
Sequence complete. Fighter is safely on board, Commander.
Let me pull out. Where is it at? Fuck it. Engage FSD.
Engaging drive.
Why in the fuck? Oh. Well, whatever. Okay. I guess I don't remember what that fucking was. Let's see what the next one is, since I gotta kill that shit too. Lillard. You about to catch L too, my guy? Get you in the head with that good stuff, bro. It's not a planet thing. Shit, I gotta. It's only one hop. That's fine. Get the FSD drive.
In a box, and so I'm going to leave it at that.
Fair enough. The next question, we really are running out of time. We've got time for one last question. Tom Sino. Go ahead.
Actually, I've been listening to everybody. Actually, I want to totally change my questions, but I'll keep it what it is. And so this is a question to Professor Peterson. So you said that trying to improve things, that about how things that go terribly wrong, and even when you have good conditions, is it easier for things to go wrong than things to go right? But the question is to you, why are conservatives called all kinds of names demeaning humanity, evangelize, or what do they call it? Vandalized, harassed, and simply just because they're cautious? And so I'll break it down a little simpler. Because if I were
full spectrum as the full spectrum system scanner. Oh shit. Full spectrum system scanner.
Affirmative, Captain. Interdiction warning.
Awaiting orders.
Oh, this bitch wanna fight.
Wilco, Bay is prepped. Systems online. Heli presence online. Awaiting your orders.
Attack target. Attack target.
Engaged target.
Copy that, Commander. Engaging enemy now.
You're done, bruh. I don't believe it.
I'll take it from here. Stop.
Fighter, recall fighter. Recall fighter.
Wilco, Commander. Returning to fighter bay now.
Fighter retrieval sequence initiated. Crew to fighter bay. Opening hatch.
Punk ass bitch. Stay there.
So I wouldn't do it, but what if I were to wear a Trump hat? How many people would punch me? How many people would beat? See, I was in American politics for 3 years. My dad, he's a lobbyist in New York and Washington, D.C. So what if I wore a Trump hat? How would you respond in this room? How many people would respond in this room? That's my question. How would you respond if I wore a Trump hat? Professor Peterson.
First question. First question. I think you've made history there. I don't think anyone's actually acted out their question quite that way.
Well, the first thing is,
I'll come to you at the end if you don't mind,
sure,
Jordan.
sure,
I'd like to hear from Van on this. I mean, we sort of touched on this before, but there's a sense among Conservatives that, and if you did wear a Trump hat, that you would be howled down and maltreated. That's what the point is. Do you think that's correct?
I think that, you know, if you make a statement, you open yourself up to criticism. It's very interesting to hear people talk about free speech and a need for free speech that implicitly denies the free speech of other people to respond to that. You know, if you were wearing a Trump hat in my company, I would leave. I'm not interested in Trump hat beliefs or Trump hatism. And that is an act of free speech as much as anything else. I think when people, you know, it's a new experience for a lot of conservatives to be criticised, you know, to not be part of the dominant culture anymore. And the idea, you know, this manifestation of these, you know, socialist, green, feminist. Like, the Greens only poll 8%. Like, this is not a mass movement of people. The fundamental lesson here for everybody, and I say this as much to myself as to anybody else, the internet is not society. And how people behave on the internet is not how we behave in our homes. It's not how we behave in our workplaces. It's not how we behave in the street. And to take as a representative sample of anything, what happens on the internet is the literal modern definition of madness.
Alex Hall.
Well, look, if I was critiquing your performance, I'd just suggest that you should have brought out the cap at the end and put it on. That would have added to it. Look, I'd say the problem is in the world today, I agree with you. I think if you did have your cap on, I have no problem with Van leaving. But in America... I didn't mean it like that. That came out wrong. This is real live television. I'm sorry about that.
I can't wait till the election, Alex.
Sorry about that. I didn't mean it that way. I meant, I have no problem with someone leaving, but the problem is that we saw in the US a young boy who was wearing the cap was attacked, and then he was portrayed as a perpetrator of violence until it was all corrected. And in the United States, which is supposed to be a bastion of free speech, I think it's sad today that people feel the need to do physical violence or to immediately respond to seeing a supporter of Donald Trump by attacking them. I think
Trump supporters speeding up black protesters.
Well, I don't believe there's any evidence of that.
We're running out of time, guys.
Maybe you should look at the internet, Alex.
I have to allow everyone to speak. And sorry, we're just about out of time. You want to finish your point quickly?
No. Well, look, I think you're right to raise it. It's a problem in the West today. People are shouting. The Prime Minister talks about this. The shouting in Canberra. He doesn't mean the politicians. He means the whole shouty political class, where the public switch off from it because they're not listening and they're shouting at each other.
Terry.
I mean, the Prime Minister doesn't need a microphone. He's that loud in Parliament, let's be honest. I don't think he should be talking about shouting. But to your point, I think that if you wore a Trump hat, nobody would punch you here. Everyone is listening to each other. And if I wore a pro-choice T-shirt, nobody would punch me here. Everyone's listening to each other respectfully. And if someone else was here wearing a hijab, then nobody would tell them, take it off and let me set it on fire. But these things, and that happened in my electorate to a woman wearing a hijab once. It was a terrible, terrible situation. So we know that there are situations where we can have meaningful, respectful disagreement and debate. And what we all need to do is be better at that. I think that's just a fact. But we also need to not assume that everybody else is personally victimising us for our beliefs all the time. Like, what I'm hearing from you guys is that a lot of people in this audience feel personally victimised by feminism. I don't feel personally victimised by anti-racist movements, even though I'm a white person, because I know that it's not about me personally or what I've done. It's about trying to change structures so that people get more freedom and more equality in our society. And so if we could all stop taking everything so personally and just listen a bit more, then I think we'll do a little better.
Catherine.
Beaten up by because when I believe, actually I've been beaten up by my faith. I'm not having a lot of ideas and everything. Because of my value system, I've been beaten up, not because I was vulgar to somebody, but because things that I wore, people actually beat me up for it.
Okay, all right, we'll take that as a comment. Thank you very much. Catherine.
Maybe trying to end it on a slightly lighter note. If you wore a Trump cap, I wouldn't see it from here, which is see the previous answer about age of panel and why I didn't play Big Bash League cricket in the Women's League. Eyes aren't what they used to be. But look, I think it's all been said. If that were to happen, it would be reprehensible. I suspect in Australia more trans women are bashed for presenting in their affirmed gender than males wearing Trump hats, but I could be wrong, and fact check it if you wish. But if you wore a Trump hat, it wouldn't bother me in the slightest, I can assure you. I'm the last person who's going to upbraid someone about their choice.
Jordan Peterson, we'll give you the last word as your international guest.
Well, 50% of the Americans voted for Trump, approximately, you know, which has been about the same, right, for the last 4 or 5 elections. It's pretty much a 50-50 split. It seems to me that there's no excuse whatsoever for vilifying someone for wearing a piece of clothing that indicates alignment with, well, in this particular situation, with the elected majority. And it does happen, and it's appalling. And I think mostly it's a consequence of a very small number of very well-organized, very radical people who have far more power for reasons that have a fair bit to do with the universities than they should. However, you know, having said that, I would say the Trump types and the Republicans in the U.S. are doing a pretty good job of hanging on to their fair share of power, and that my observation in the U.S. is that the political system there is actually quite nicely balanced. And so, despite the fact that, you know, you've run into personal trouble for the sorts of things that you're describing, the political debate between the right and the left, which is a very important debate, seems to be moving forward in a manner that indicates the fundamental robustness of the institutions of democracy in the United States. And I think that's the case in most of the Western world. So I don't think that there's any reason to despair on a broader scale, even though you may have encountered some things that were quite nasty personally.
We'll end on that optimistic note. That's all we have time for tonight. Please thank our panel: Catherine McGregor, Jordan Peterson, Terry Butler, Alex Hawke and Dan Batten.
Come on now. That's quite loud. Now what is going on? Do I need to log out?
Well, that's one of the more positive welcomes I've had from the university.
All right, yeah, thank you for coming. If you'd like to give a few opening remarks, and then we'll move on to some questions.
Okay, so I have about half an hour for this, I guess.
About 15 to 20 minutes for the opening remarks.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine, no problem. So I think I'm going to talk to you today a little bit about hierarchy. It's a small talk that I've been developing as I've been doing my public lectures over the last couple of weeks. It's an elaboration of some of the ideas I put forth in, well, some of my scientific writings and in Maps of Meaning, but more particularly in 12 Rules for Life, in Rule 1, which is stand up straight with your shoulders back. And it's in part a meditation on hierarchy, and I want to talk about the political significance of that and let you know how I've been trying to sort that out in my own imagination. So I'm going to put, and I think it sheds light on the political, on the nature of political debate itself, and maybe deeper light on why temperamental factors might contribute to political framing and perception, because we know that people tend to vote their temperament, although there are other reasons that influence their political allegiance and their voting behavior. So let's start with a couple of simple observations. The first is that complex biological creatures, and even simple biological creatures for that matter, have to move forward in the world. And so that's the case for any creature that's mobile, and that goes all the way down to one-celled organisms. The idea that approach and avoidance are the fundamental motivations is a very old biological idea and seems to apply across levels of analysis in the animal kingdom. And it's true for us as well. And we have to move forward towards things because we have requirements. There are things that we require to keep us alive and to keep us wanting to be alive as well. And those are different things. And we move forward towards things that we value. So there's two propositions there. The first is that we have to move forward because there are things to move forward to, because there are things we need and want. And the second is that to move forward towards something is simultaneously to value it. And so one of the implications of that is that we always live in a framework of value. There's no escaping
Want
that.
some
And
wet
we move
work.
forward. I detailed this out quite substantially in my book, Maps of Meaning, but we're always
I'm gonna
at
give it a
place,
second.
And we're always moving towards
And
a
while I
place
give it
that
a
in
second, I'm gonna
principle
take a
has
small
some
beat right
advantage over the place
motherfucking
we're
back.
at. Otherwise, why move towards it? And so what that means is that there's no life without value. At least there's no human life without value. Out of necessity, and also not only out of necessity at the physiological level, but also out of necessity at the psychological level, because another thing that you might point out that I think is usefully pointed out is that not only do you have to move from point A to B in life, but point A is often a very difficult place to be, because we're fragile and bounded and mortal and limited, and because we know that. And so one of the implications of that, as many great religious traditions are at pains to illustrate or demonstrate or proclaim, is that life is essentially suffering. And I believe that to be a fundamental truth. But perhaps not the most fundamental truth, because I think the most fundamental truth is that despite the fact that life is suffering, people can transcend that. And partly the way they transcend that is by pursuing things of value. And so that if there is no value proposition at hand, then you have no meaning to justify the difficult conditions of your life. And that's brutally difficult for people. You know, Nietzsche said, he who has a why can bear any how. And you see, and I've certainly seen this as a clinical practitioner, that people who have no purpose in their life are embittered by the difficulties of their life. And they become first bitter, and then resentful, and then revengeful, and then cruel. And there's plenty of places to go past cruel. That's just where you start if you're really on a downhill path. All right, so those are the first propositions. The second proposition would be, well, if you're going to pursue something of value, because you're a social creature, you're going to pursue that thing of value in a social space, and that means you're going to compete and cooperate with people around you in the pursuit of that value. And what that inevitably means is that, given that the pursuit of anything valuable is going to be a collective enterprise, that you're going to produce a hierarchy, or maybe more than one hierarchy, but at least a hierarchy of competence in relationship to that pursuit. So it doesn't matter what you decide to pursue, maybe you're going to do that cooperatively, you're going to find that you and other people vary in your ability to manage that pursuit effectively and efficiently. And so there's going to be a hierarchy of people, from those who are very good at the pursuit. Maybe it's pole vaulting, maybe it's delivering massages, maybe it's delivering groceries, maybe it's setting up an enterprise. It doesn't matter. But if it's a valuable pursuit and you pursue it socially, you're going to produce a hierarchy. And the hierarchy is going to be one of competence. And so if you're going to pursue value, then you're going to construct a hierarchy. And then there's an implication from that, which is that if you construct a hierarchy, most of the people within that hierarchical structure are a minority of people are going to be fantastically successful at the pursuit, and a very large number are going to stack up at the bottom. And that's a manifestation of what's known as Price's law. It's mapped by the Pareto distribution. It's an expression of what's been known among economists as the Matthew principle from the New Testament. To those who have everything, more will be given. From those who have nothing, everything will be taken away. And it's an iron law of the distribution of success in hierarchy. So if you're going to have value and you're going to have hierarchy, then you're going to have inequality. And that's a problem. Now, you can't, so now you have a political divide there. So the conservative types say, well, we need the hierarchies. And that's self-evident as far as I'm concerned, given that set of propositions, because if you're going to pursue something of value, which you have to and need to, then you're going to produce a hierarchy. So if you demolish the hierarchies, you demolish value itself, and that's not a tenable move. The left wing, though, says, and to their credit, yeah, but you have to be very careful with your hierarchies, because they tend towards inequality of distribution. That's one problem. Once they're established, they always also tend to a form of tyranny, because once a hierarchy of competence has been established, it can be invaded by people who use power as the means to attain status in the hierarchy. And that can corrupt and destroy even the entire hierarchy. So you have to be on guard for that. Plus, if your hierarchy becomes too steep in its distribution, so it's too tiny a fraction of people at the top and too great an agglomeration of people at the bottom, especially under conditions of genuine privation, then the people at the bottom, it's not only unjust and unfair and producing excess suffering, but the people at the bottom have nothing to lose and might as well just flip the hierarchy on its end. And that's not a good way to produce a sustainable society. You don't want to put people in a position where they have nothing to lose, especially if you have something to lose, but also just with regards to principles of like fairness and justice, let's say. So it seems to me that that's a decent way of conceptualizing the political landscape, and that gives you a conceptual framework within which you can put people on the left and right in their proper position. The right basically is that portion of the population that's whose temperamental proclivity is to admire and support hierarchies and work effectively within them. And that's actually the personality traits that make up a conservative, because conservatives by temperament are low in trait openness, which is a creativity dimension that's associated with lateral thinking. It's not, I would say, it's very environmentally underdetermined. It's a biological predisposition, especially with regards to creativity, and high in conscientiousness. And the conservative temperamental types make very good managers and administrators. That's how they manifest themselves in the world. Essentially, if you set up a hierarchy and it runs on algorithmically, then the conservatives will do very well in that structure because they can implement an algorithm and they're very good at implementing. Whereas the liberal types are very good at generating new hierarchies. And that's because they're high in trait openness. They're less conscientious, so they're not suited as well to within hierarchy operation. But in a functioning economy and in a functioning democracy, I would say, you need both types. You need the liberal types to establish new territory and to put out new values so that new hierarchies might be organized, so that effective movement towards those ends might be instantiated. And you need the conservatives to actually implement the processes. And so a society of only conservatives becomes static, and that's not good because the environment transforms and you have to keep up with it. And a society that's only composed of the left-leaning liberal types is very good at generating all sorts of new possibilities, but very bad at generating all sorts of new actualities. And so we should be, first of all, cognizant of the fact that hierarchical organization is inescapable if you're also going to pursue value. Second, that if you produce hierarchical structures, that you're going to produce inequality inevitably, and there are negative consequences as a function of that, and that both sides of that equation, let's say, need a voice because both of those functions are valuable, necessary, but also at odds with one another, and at permanent odds, because it is the case that you need hierarchies, because otherwise you have nothing to do. And it's also the case that if you have hierarchies, then the poor will always be with you. And that's a chronic functional problem that has to be addressed. And that's the proper place, I would say, of the left. So that's only 15 minutes. So, but I'm going to stop there, I think, and you can chew on those propositions and see what you think of those. But I'm really interested, actually, in having a discussion with all of you, and would be happy to start the question period a little earlier than might otherwise be necessary.
All right.
So,
thank you very much. Please join me in thanking. So now we'll move on to some questions. I will ask two initial questions and then open up to the audience in order to ensure that as many people as possible have a chance of asking questions. So my first question is, political correctness is a rather vague term that refers to a wide range of issues, from preventing explicitly racist hate speech to calling out someone for wearing culturally insensitive clothes. Do you think that we should universally reject political correctness, or is there a line that can be drawn?
Well, that was the other thing I was thinking about talking about tonight, and I'm actually having a debate in Canada about that very proposition tomorrow. So here's what I've been thinking about that. I'm trying to formulate my thoughts for my 6-minute initial opening remarks tomorrow. It's a very tight time constraint. So think about it this way. Imagine that you need to describe the world in order to perceive the world and to act in it, both of those, not just to act in it, but also to perceive it, and that you need a description at different levels of resolution. You know, and you can think about how you use your computer when you're dealing with images. You know, there are some times when what you really need is a thumbnail, because it doesn't require much processing power, and it's sufficiently representative of the reality so that you can do whatever you need to do with the image, with the thumbnail. And you never replace the thumbnail with a high-resolution image if the thumbnail will do. Now, I really like that. I don't think it's an analogy. I actually think it's a description of a very large number of cognitive operations. And maybe there's a rule of thumb, which is never use a high-resolution theory when a low-resolution theory will do. The converse is also true, by the way. So then let's say that in order to orient ourselves properly in society, we need a general-purpose, low-resolution theory, existential theory, something like that. It's not precisely a description of the objective world. It's more like an agreed-upon it's an agreed-upon narrative about how the world is constructed in relationship to human experience and how we should act in the world. So how we should look at ourselves, how we should look at history, how we should look at our social being so that we can coexist peacefully, so that we can move forward, so that our societies function. And then imagine that that comes in broadly two forms, and I think it does. One is a collectivist form, and I would say that that collectivist form is built very deeply into human nature. It's essentially a tribal outlook. It's an outlook that you can trace back hundreds of thousands of years, and perhaps more deeply than that. We know, for example, that chimpanzees have a tribal outlook, and that chimpanzees will patrol the borders of their tribes looking for chimpanzees who aren't of the tribe, and when they find them, they will tear them into pieces. And so that was revealed by Jane Goodall in the 1970s. It was very shocking to everyone when that was first discovered, because there was a very influential line of thinking, mostly derived from people who were influenced by Rousseau, that human beings were innately good and that only culture made them cruel and capable of atrocity. But the fact that the chimpanzees patrol their borders and tear apart their enemies really did that theory in a very serious way. So at least made it more complicated. So the collectivist view is essentially that the best way to conceptualize what a human being is to look at what tribe they belong to. And the tribe might be, well, this is one of the problems with the collectivist view, is which of your tribal allegiances is to be paramount. And that's actually a fatal problem, by the way, because there's an infinite number of ways you can be categorized, and it isn't obvious which of those tribal allegiances should be canonical, and hence the rise of intersectionality, which is something that's a dragon that will eat its own tail, certainly. But there's a notion there. It's like the most important thing about, forget about that for a minute. We'll say, well, the most important thing about you is your group, your gender, your sex, your race, your ethnicity, all of the multiple categories that we're supposed to be considering as fundamental realities now. And that the best way to construe reality is that it's a battleground between those groups for dominance, power. And that's the postmodern ethos, and it's a pretty decent thumbnail sketch of reality. You can sum it up quite quickly. You can use it as a guide to action in all sorts of domains. It has its consequences, however. And one of the consequences is that it's tribal. And tribal identities tend towards mayhem. Now, the alternative low-resolution view is the view that I think has been articulated most effectively in the West, and perhaps of all the places where it's been most effectively articulated in the West, the most effective articulation has come from the UK. I mean, there's something remarkable about what your country has done with regards to laying out the idea of individual sovereignty in a fully articulated manner, in a way that allows a political system to arise predicated on the assumption that the individual is of intrinsic value. And if you need a thumbnail view of the world, the most effective thumbnail view of the world isn't that you're the member of a tribe, even though in many ways you are, and the member of many tribes. The most effective thumbnail view is that you're to be regarded as a sovereign individual, and you're to treat other people that way as well, both with regards to their rights, but even more importantly, and often forgotten, with regards to their responsibilities. And I think that polities that are based on the first set of presuppositions, the tribal, degenerate into precisely what you'd expect, which is tribal warfare. And the second have the possibility of blooming into exactly what they have bloomed into, which are the most functional societies, the most peaceful societies, the most successful societies, the societies that are the best at generating wealth along with inequality that the world has ever seen. And so I would say we sacrifice the latter to the former at our great peril. And I would also say that, and this is something that